it's sometimes my role to sully the scholarly conversation that you all are having. We were talking about this in our pre-conversation. One thing that we've done in our efforts to get the folks in the community to see this as their story is we've handed people these images literally physically and said, make these into memes. Give us a caption. Make this come alive in your contemporary vernacular. We don't say that because that wouldn't.
Particularly with young people.
Yeah. Young people, absolutely. We've done this in the Vel Phillips Juvenile Detention Center. And this one led to one of my very favorite memes, which the young people wrote, "Nuck if you buck." Which they see it's about to go down, right? Like just in that one tight little phrase of contemporary understanding, "Nuck if you buck." Like, absolutely. Even if you don't know what "nuck if you buck" means, like
you get it, right?
You get it, right?
Absolutely. You know, Keisha in Command Central is telling us that we need to get ready to start moving to our second section, which will get us talking about your teaching and research process. But to help us move along that way, yeah, Adam, definitely keep showing us more images. I wanted to ask a question that I've been wanting to hear from both of you for years now around this. You know, part of what I like to do in the classroom with Milwaukee's civil rights history is talk about the open housing marches as this sort of rich blending of what we traditionally think about Southern civil rights activism with this rich and emerging sense of Black power radicalism. Like it comes together in Milwaukee in some very, very impressive ways. It kind of gives us a rich bridge from what would be that traditional civil rights, modern civil rights movement history into this much more radical Black power moment. What are your thoughts about that? Have I been wrong about that? I hope not.
No, I don't think you've been wrong about it. The Milwaukee movement was a very complex movement. It definitely blended, pieces of the Southern civil rights movement as well as the Black power movement. I mean, you had so much going on, you know what I mean? First of all, they did embrace Black power. They would chant Black power. Even Father Grappy would chant Black power. He would encourage Black power. That's what the commandos really were all about, creating some strong Black male leadership. But at the same time, it was church-based. It was based out of, but not based out of a Baptist church. It was based out of a Catholic church. So you have those Catholic elements in there. Their advisor was a white man. So it was integrated at the same time. And there were white youth council members and such. So it was definitely a very complex, diverse movement that blended all of those elements. I think you're exactly right in seeing the movement that way.
Well, and I got it from you too, so.
I mean, I think that's one of the most important and one of the most exciting dynamics of the Milwaukee history in particular, and Northern movement history more broadly, is that it really helps us, we have set this kind of popular narrative of the civil rights era, and it's regionally based, and it's kind of triumphalist, and it emphasizes integration, all these different ways, nonviolence. And the Milwaukee campaign kind of challenges all of those along the way in important ways, which are important about Milwaukee specifically, but they're just more important about how we understand the movement era broadly, even when we think about the South, where nonviolence took place alongside throughout armed self-defense. And for instance, it didn't all go down in churches or Baptist churches either. So there's, I think that problematizing of the way the popular story of the movement happens is really key in understanding what exactly went down and what kinds of lessons we should be taking from this history and how this can be a usable past to us. And it just opens fantastic ways for students in classrooms to think into that complexity about, these are not parallel lines like integration on one hand and Black power on the other hand, that these things were intertwined together, and the very same people often at the same time articulated things we might call and put in the column of integrationism and also Black power stuff, that these things were not separate and distinct, but
Sure.
tied together, and they were created by locality and changing and used by activists as they needed them in the moment as well. And I think that figure of Black Power or Father Grappi and Black Power and the Commandos and Youth Council is really an important one and rich as well, because we've got the Commandos who are men, and there's a real emphasis on raising up a new generation of Black men in leadership roles. But in the Youth Council, it's mainly young women, and there's this important place of young women in the Milwaukee movement too. And then you have Vel Phillips also, and her important and courageous institutional leadership, which then blends over as she comes down and marches too. So, there's gender stuff going on here, there's race stuff going on here, there's class stuff between middle class African Americans and more working class African Americans that are just blurring a lot of these lines. And then Father Grappi himself, I love to tell the story of when they went to Washington, and activists are trying to raise up the issue of housing nationally for a national law, and they invite Milwaukee to come, and Grappi and Commandos go, and they're confronted by a group of local Black Power advocates in Washington, D.C., and they call the Milwaukee Commandos out for being what they say is led by a white man. And Grappi doesn't respond himself. He kind of goes to the side of the room, and the Commandos, these young African-American men, step forward and articulate how they are Black Power and what Black Power means to them, that it is church-based, that it is an interracial movement there, but it's also militant, and they practice armed self-defense, meaning not with guns, but that they're willing to fight back with their fists, and that Grappi is legit because it's not about, as Dick Gregory is going to emphasize, the color of your skin, but about your consciousness and your willingness to be there with the struggle, and that Grappi had proven that and demonstrated that. So it's raising, Black Power is a debated issue at the time, and it continues to be. And the Milwaukee movement really raises these interesting questions about what is it, who can it be, who can be it, and in it, and what does it mean to have a militant movement in the urban North?
We've got a couple questions to these exact points. One of which one of our attendees wants to know, were there similar developments happening in Milwaukee such that, like in the South, folks would come from different parts of the country to take part? Do we have here in Milwaukee a similar kind of experience where folks from different parts of the country would come and take part in our movement?
Yeah, that's one of the notable things, and it's one of the things that connects to the Southern movement in some ways. Father Grappi and several members of the Commandos and Youth Councils had gone south in support of earlier campaigns during Freedom Summer and voting rights campaigns, and most notably for Grappi, the Selma voting rights campaign, and had learned about kind of militant nonviolence and a confrontational nonviolence, and brought it back and tried to adapt that into a Northern context. And when they had those first few nights of marches and went across the viaduct and elicited such massive white reaction, like Dr. King had done in Selma, Father Grappi and others in the movement put out an ecumenical call, national call, to invite people of conscience to come to Milwaukee to participate in the campaign and to bear witness to what was happening. And hundreds of people did that. It tended to be more, those numbers were higher on weekends. They kept marching every day. So people would come in for weekends, and some would stay for several days at a time, and others for a few days. But yeah, so that's part of what got it national attention and national focus and made it a driving force, and ultimately passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which I often refer to as the kind of the forgotten third Civil Rights Act of the movement era.